June 4th, 1942. 500 hours. Northwest Pacific. A grey dawn over the carrier Akagi. The sea is calm enough to look harmless. A long steel blue sheet with only a low swell sliding under the flight deck. On Akagi's bridge, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands with his binoculars pressed to his eyes, shoulders squared inside his damp coat. The wind carries the smell of aviation fuel and salt spray. Below him, deck crews move with practiced speed, hands slick with sweat and oil as they push bomb carts and roll aircraft into position. Everything is routine. Everything is on schedule. Everything feels like it will end in victory. Nagumo is not a man who wastes words. His staff has learned to read the small signs, the way his jaw tightens when he is annoyed, the slight tilt of his head when he is listening rather than deciding. Around him, officers murmur about the first wave that has already gone toward Midway Atoll. The plan, at least on paper, is elegant. Midway is to be crushed. The American carriers are expected to appear late, frightened and outmatched. When they do, the Kido Butai will hammer them into scrap. Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, keeps his voice measured as he reads the early reports. Midway is still resisting. The airfield is damaged but not silenced. That is inconvenient, not disastrous. It can be fixed. Kusaka leans close to Nagumo and says, in the flat tone of a man repeating procedure, another strike may be required. Nagumo does not answer immediately. He watches the deck, the orderly movement, the rising sun turning the carrier's wake into a pale ribbon. In his mind, the carrier force is the sharp tip of Japan's spear, and a spear does not hesitate. He gives the order to prepare a second strike on Midway. Down in the hangar decks, armorers and mechanics react like a living machine. Bombs are moved, torpedoes are shifted, fuses are checked, sweat drips from noses onto metal casings. The carrier Akagi is a city of steel and heat, and every corridor hums with the confidence of men who have been winning for 6 months. Far away, beyond the horizon and out of sight, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sits in the battleship Yamato, deep within the main body of the combined fleet. On Yamato's vast bridge, the air is cooler, the decks broader, the war more distant. Yamamoto's face is calm, almost unreadable, but his eyes are tired. He has gambled everything on this operation. He knows the Americans are dangerous because they are unpredictable. Still, the plan depends on surprise and massed force, and he believes he has both. A signal officer steps forward on Yamato with a fresh message. Yamamoto reads it without expression. He hands it to his staff, and the staff begins to talk in low voices. Fragmentary reports, confusing contacts, American aircraft appearing from unexpected directions, the kind of information that, on any other day, might be dismissed as fog of war. Back on Akagi, that fog thickens fast. A lookout calls out aircraft inbound. Then another, on the bridge. Heads turn. The sound arrives next. A distant buzzing, like insects swelling into a roar. The first attackers are American torpedo planes. Low and slow, skimming the surface. They look clumsy, almost pitiful. But they come on stubbornly, straight at the Japanese carriers. Nagumo watches them with cold focus. The Japanese combat air patrol dives. Zeros slash down, and the sky becomes scattered with black puffs and falling shapes. American planes hit the water in flames. Some keep coming even as they burn. The crews on Akagi's bridge begin to exhale, convinced they are watching desperation, not a true threat. Then the torpedoes run, off the port side. The carrier Kaga throws up towering columns of water as she turns. Akagi shudders as her own helm swings hard. Officers grip railings. The deck below tilts slightly as the ship carves a new path. Torpedo tracks streak across the sea like pale scars. Most miss. A few come close enough that men can see the spinning wakes and feel their stomachs tighten. The torpedo attack is beaten back, but it has dragged the Japanese fighters down low. It has forced the carriers to maneuver. It has scattered the defensive screen. On Akagi's bridge, Kusaka allows himself a tight nod, as if to say the crisis has passed. Nagumo lowers his binoculars. His expression remains controlled, but a small, involuntary line appears between his brows. Something about the timing feels wrong. The air feels wrong. A voice from a radio station below reaches the bridge, strained and urgent. Report of enemy dive bombers. For a heartbeat, nobody moves. Nagumo's head turns sharply. Not toward the sea, but upward, toward the empty blue above the ship. He searches the sky as if he can force it to reveal what it is hiding. Around him, the bridge officers instinctively look up too, squinting into the sun glare. And then, as if they have been dropped from the heavens, dark specks appear. They grow larger fast, so fast. One of the junior officers whispers, almost without meaning to, "Impossible." Nagumo does not whisper. His voice comes out low, hard and controlled. "Fighters, up, now." But the sky is already falling. They come in steep, disciplined dives, wings trembling, engines screaming like tearing metal. American dive bombers. SBD dauntless, black dots turning into unmistakable silhouettes with fixed landing gear and bright glint off. Canopies. The sun is behind them, and for a cruel instant it looks like the sky itself is attacking. On Akagi's bridge, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo feels the ship's anti-aircraft guns begin to hammer. The sound is not one sound, but a layered violence, the sharp crack of smaller guns and the deeper thumps of heavier mounts, all of it shaking the bridge windows. Below, sailors flinch and keep firing anyway, faces tilted upward, mouths open as they shout orders that the wind steals. Nagumo raises his binoculars again. His eyes track one bomber, then another. They are not wandering. They are not panicked. They are choosing targets. A bomb falls. It is a small, dark shape at first, then a tearing blur. It strikes with a flash that seems too bright for daylight, followed by an expanding orange bloom and a thick, oily black pillar that climbs into the air. The deck lurches. The shock rolls through Akagi's structure like a punch through bone. Damage reports flood upward in fragments. Hangar deck hit. Fires. Aviation fuel. Armed aircraft. Kusaka's face tightens. He knows the worst possible thing has happened. Below decks, aircraft are being serviced and rearmed in the narrow hangar spaces, surrounded by fuel hoses and stacks of munitions. A single bomb does not just damage a ship. It turns the hangar into an oven. Nagumo's voice stays rigidly calm, but the edge beneath it is unmistakable. Fire control. Damage parties. Clear the hangar. Another bomb hits. Then another. The deck becomes a nightmare of flame and twisted metal. A shock wave throws men off their feet. The smell reaches the bridge, burned paint and fuel and something worse underneath. The temperature rises as if the sun has been brought down closer, across the formation. Kaga is also struck, her vast flight deck punctured and burning. Soryu takes hits that ignite her aircraft and tear open her internal spaces. From Akagi's bridge, these carriers are visible in glimpses through smoke and the whipping haze of gunfire. It is not a battle scene anymore. It is an industrial fire in the middle of the ocean. Nagumo's staff tries to build clarity out of chaos. They speak in clipped phrases, as if the right wording might stop the flames. Kaga on fire. Severe damage. Soryu on fire. Severe damage. Akagi hit. Fires spreading. Words like severe and damage feel weak. They belong to peacetime reports. They do not capture the reality of men burning on ladders and aircraft exploding in chain reactions. On the radio circuits, The carrier Hiryu is still maneuvering, still able to fight. Hiryu's commander, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, is a different kind of officer, harder, more aggressive. He has the face of a man who has already decided what he will do in defeat and in victory. When the reports come to him that Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu have been crippled, his first reaction is not disbelief. It is fury sharpened into clarity. On Hiryu's bridge, Yamaguchi's eyes narrow. He speaks to his staff with a cold certainty. Launch, immediate counterstrike, find the enemy carriers. For him, the battle is not yet lost. It is simply changed. If the Americans have carriers nearby, then carriers can be killed, even now. But for Nagumo, standing amid smoke and shaking steel, the world has shifted on its axis. A messenger arrives on Akagi's bridge, face ashen, uniform stained with soot. He salutes with trembling hands. His voice cracks as he delivers what is perhaps the most brutal kind of information, the kind that does not contain opinion, only fact. The fires cannot be contained. Nagumo's expression does not break, but those around him see something go hollow in his eyes. He turns slightly toward Kusaka. For a brief second, his chief of staff looks like he might protest, as if refusing the reality could somehow keep the ship afloat. But Kusaka has been in enough battles to know that steel does not care about pride. Nagumo gives the order to prepare to abandon the flight deck operations. He speaks like a man giving routine instructions, but the words are heavy. And then comes the moment that will echo all the way to Tokyo. On the combined fleet's communications network, short, coded signals begin to form a picture. Not hope, not confusion, a picture of catastrophe. From Kaga, from Soryu, from Akagi. Each one is a step deeper into darkness. On Yamato, far behind, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto receives the first coherent confirmation that 3 of his frontline carriers are effectively out of action. The signal officer places the message in his hands. Yamamoto reads it once, then again, as if repetition might reveal a hidden alternative. His staff watches his face for a crack. Yamamoto does not shout. He does not slam the message down. He simply goes very still. After a long silence, he speaks, quiet enough that the bridge crew has to lean in. This is not expected. The phrase is painfully restrained, almost polite, but behind it is something closer to disbelief. Yamamoto had designed Midway as a trap, a final, decisive blow. Now the trap is closing on him. In the carrier force, the officers begin to use words that feel forbidden. Sank. The first time the word is spoken aloud on a Japanese command circuit, it carries a strange weight, like a superstition being invoked. Ships are damaged. They are burning. They are immobilized. But sunk is final. Sunk means the sea has claimed them. On Akagi, flames are now visible even from the bridge, rolling up through openings in the deck. Nagumo watches sailors run with hoses that look like thin threads against a roaring furnace. He watches men drag wounded comrades away from smoking hatches. He watches an aircraft elevator stuck half-raised, jammed like a broken jaw, with fire licking around its edges. Kusaka steps beside him and speaks softly, not as a subordinate, but as a man sharing an unbearable truth. Admiral, Akagi cannot continue. Nagumo closes his eyes for a moment. When he opens them, the decision is already made. He gives the order that no Japanese admiral ever wanted to give in the middle of what was supposed to be Japan's greatest carrier victory. Prepare to abandon ship. But the shock has not finished unfolding. Hiryu's counterstrike will land its blows. American carriers will burn. For a few hours, it will seem as if the battle might still balance on a knife edge. And then, in the afternoon light, the last Japanese carrier in fighting condition will be found, and hit, and begin to die. And only then, when the smoke spreads wide across the ocean and the radio reports settle into finality, will the senior admirals fully understand what has happened. 4 carriers. 4. Japan's frontline air power has been ripped out by the roots in a single day, yet Hiryu is still alive. On Hiryu's bridge, Rear Admiral Temen Yamaguchi stands steady, eyes fixed forward. His voice is clipped. Efficient, he treats disaster like a problem to be solved with speed and courage. Around him, officers relay bearings, fuel states, and scattered sightings. The ship is turning hard, throwing spray, trying to keep distance from incoming threats while her own aircraft launch. Hiryu's deck crews move like men working inside a ticking clock. Dive bombers and torpedo planes are pushed into position, engines cough to life, prop wash, whipping loose papers and salt mist. Pilots climb into cockpits with the calm of men trained to hide fear. Some of them have already watched sister carriers burning. They have already smelled the smoke of their own fleet. Now they strap in anyway. Yamaguchi watches the first strike lift off. His gaze follows the last aircraft until it becomes a dot, then disappears. Only then does he exhale. He turns to his air officer, voice quiet but hard. Find them. Sink them. The first Hiryu strike finds an American carrier. The radio reports come back tense and proud. And for a moment, there is a fragile thread of hope. A carrier hit. Fires. Enemy deck disrupted. In the Japanese code and phrasing, it sounds like the battle might still be dragged back towards something that can be called victory. On Akagi, now abandoned by most of her aircraft operations and choking on smoke, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo has transferred his flag. He is no longer standing on the bridge of the ship that carried him through Pearl Harbor. He is on a destroyer. Cramped, the air thick with engine exhaust and the smell of fear he cannot control. From this smaller deck, he watches Akagi in the distance. She looks wounded in a way that feels personal. Her once clean lines hidden by fire and smoke. The sea around her is dotted with debris and tiny figures in the water. A staff officer approaches Nagumo with new signals. Hiryu has struck. Another American carrier might be hit. There is a faint lift in the officer's posture as he reports it. As if the news itself is a handhold on a cliff, Nagumo nods. But his eyes stay fixed on the burning horizon. He does not smile. He has already learned what one moment of hope can cost. Far to the west, on Yamato, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto receives the same reports. Hiryu has hit the enemy. American carriers are burning. His staff leans in, hungry for any sign that the plan might still work. Yamamoto's response is measured. He has never been a man to confuse a blow with a victory. He knows that if American carriers are still afloat, they can still launch. And if they can launch, then Hiryu can still be found. He orders the fleet to continue closing. He orders submarines and cruisers to search. He orders every available unit to do its part, because now the battle has become a race against time and distance, not the clean trap he had envisioned. Then the sky closes again. Late afternoon, the air is clearer over Hiryu than it had been over Akagi at the moment of disaster. The combat air patrol has been cycling, pilots exhausted, fuel low. The ship's guns are ready. The men on deck look upward constantly, as if expecting the next attack to drop from the sun. It does. American dive bombers come in high, their silhouettes sharp. They break into dives that feel impossibly steep. The first bombs miss, throwing up white towers of water that slap the hull. Then one strikes near the forward elevator. The explosion is a violent bloom, ripping metal and igniting fuel. Another bomb hits, then another. The flight deck is punctured and burning, and the heat begins to build in the places that matter most. Aircraft that were being prepared are caught in the blast. Fuel spreads like a living thing across the deck, flowing into seams and pooling where it can burn hottest. On Hiryu's bridge, Yamaguchi does not flinch. He watches the deck disappear under smoke. He watches sailors running with hoses and axes. He watches the ship that still carried Japan's last carrier Hope begin to turn into another torch. Damage reports come up in jagged pieces. Fires, hangar deck, aircraft burning. Steering affected, explosions continuing. The phrase that matters most arrives a minute later, spoken by an officer whose voice is trying not to break. "Admiral, we cannot contain it." For a moment, the bridge is silent except for the thud of distant explosions and the crackle of fire. Yamaguchi's face remains composed, but there is something in his eyes that looks like he has been forced to stare at the edge of an abyss. He looks toward the horizon where smoke from Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu still stains the sky. He knows what this means. Not damage, not retreat, not even defeat in the ordinary sense. This is the end of the carrier force as Japan had built it. A staff officer speaks carefully, choosing words as if they are fragile. "We should consider abandoning ship." Yamaguchi's reply is immediate. His tone is calm, almost gentle, but the decision inside it is iron. No. He turns to Captain Tomeo Kaku, the ship's captain. The two men exchange a look that contains years of shared understanding about duty and disgrace. Yamaguchi speaks again, not loudly, but with a firmness that quiets the bridge. "I will remain." His words do not need explanation. Everyone present knows the tradition. The commander stays with his ship. The admiral who has lost the battle does not scramble for a lifeboat while his sailors die in the corridors below. This is not just pride. It is the brutal math of honor that the Imperial Navy has trained into its leaders. Yet even as Yamaguchi chooses to stay, the message that will shatter Tokyo is forming in radio code. On the communications circuits, the reports become more specific. Hiryu is burning. Hiryu is immobilized. Hiryu is being abandoned in part. Hiryu is, in practical terms, lost. And now the combined fleet has to face the full shape of the disaster. On Yamato's bridge, a communications officer brings Yamamoto the signal. The words are crisp, formal, and devastating. Hiryu is no longer capable of flight operations. 4 carriers. The number is no longer a fear. It is a fact. Yamamoto reads the message. His hand tightens slightly on the paper. For a heartbeat, his mask nearly breaks, and the men around him see the hint of something like pain. Then he controls it. He turns to his staff and speaks in a voice that is low, steady, and deadly serious. "We have lost the first carrier striking force." The sentence hangs in the air as if the ship itself has stopped moving. An aide swallows. Another officer stares at the deck planks. No one wants to be the first to speak after that, because everyone understands what those words mean beyond the immediate battle. This was not just 4 ships. This was the trained air groups, the experienced deck crews, the core of Japan's naval aviation, the weapon that had made the empire look invincible. And now it is burning on the sea. Yamamoto's staff begins to ask about next steps, but the questions sound distant, like voices heard underwater. Withdraw. Continue. Attempt night action. Commit the battleships. Find the American carriers again. The options exist on paper, but the strategic reality has shifted. Yamamoto looks out at the ocean, and he sees the battle not as a day, but as a future. The initiative is slipping away. The enemy, whom he had hoped to crush, is still alive, still dangerous. And the messages being sent toward Tokyo will soon arrive at the desks of senior admirals who have never imagined that 4 carriers could vanish in one operation. When those men hear the confirmations, their first instinct will be to reject it. Not possible, not our carriers. Not all 4, but the radio does not care what anyone believes. In Tokyo, the air feels different. It is June 1942, and the capital is a city that has been living on headlines of victory. Pearl Harbor, the fall of Singapore, the rapid advance across Southeast Asia. The Imperial Japanese Navy has been the sharpest symbol of national power. and its carrier arm has been the jewel at the center. Inside Navy Ministry offices, the rooms smell of ink, tobacco, and polished wood. Telephones sit like coiled snakes on desks. Maps cover walls. Men in immaculate uniforms move with controlled urgency, because the most dangerous thing in a headquarters is not panic, it is disbelief. The first signals arrive as fragments. Reports from the front are always partial at first. They carry coordinates, timestamps, short phrases, the kind of language that can be misread as caution rather than catastrophe. Heavy damage, fires, unable to conduct flight operations. A senior officer reads the lines and frowns. Heavy damage is bad. Heavy damage can be repaired. Heavy damage means the ship might limp home. That is what heavy damage usually means. But then another message arrives. And another. Akagi. Kaga. Soryu. Then Hiryu. 4 names. Each one a symbol. Each one a pillar of Japan's naval air power. And the repetition is what makes it start to feel wrong. 1 carrier might be unlucky. 2 might be a hard fight. 3 is a calamity. 4 is something else. At the Naval General Staff, Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki is one of the men who receives updates and helps interpret them. He is sharp, meticulous, and loyal to Yamamoto. He has a diary mind, the kind of officer who records the war not only as operations but as emotion and consequence. When the full confirmation settles, Ugaki's reaction is not theatrical. It is stunned silence. He stares at the message traffic as if it is a foreign language he cannot decode. His mouth tightens. His hand hovers over his pen. The room around him continues to move. But in his head, time slows. Someone nearby mutters, almost reflexively, "This cannot be true." Another officer answers without looking up, voice strained. The signals are consistent. That is what breaks them. Consistent. Multiple sources, different circuits, different times. The fog of war clears not into good news, but into a clean, brutal shape. In a separate office, Admiral Osami Nagano, Chief of the Naval General Staff, is informed. He is the senior man, the one who must absorb disaster and turn it into policy, into orders, into a narrative that can be presented to government and emperor. His face is reserved by habit, but when he hears the carrier list, his posture changes by a fraction, as if his spine has been tapped with ice. Akagi lost. Kaga lost. Soryu lost. Hiryu lost. Nagano's eyes narrow. He asks for confirmation in the way senior men do. Not because he thinks the messenger is lying, but because he desperately needs the universe to offer an alternative. Are you certain? The staff officer answers carefully. He does not embellish. He does not soften. He gives the facts as the radio has given them. The carrier division is destroyed. There is a pause. Nagano exhales. Slow. When he speaks, it is not anger. It is the voice of a man realizing the war has changed its shape. This will be difficult to explain. The phrase sounds almost absurd compared to the burning ships and drowning sailors thousands of kilometers away. But in Tokyo, explanation is power. The empire is built on certainty and controlled information. A disaster of this scale threatens not only the fleet, but the confidence that holds the system together. Other admirals in Tokyo react with their own versions of shock. Some become coldly pragmatic, already counting what carriers remain, what air groups can be rebuilt, how quickly new ships can be completed. Others become furious, looking for a reason that feels safer than chance and enemy skill. They begin to ask questions that are sharp enough to cut. How were American carriers there? Why was our reconnaissance incomplete? Why were we surprised? What of the submarine screen? Where was the decisive strike? In those questions, you can hear the seed of blame. But blame does not fix the immediate truth. The immediate truth is that 4 carriers are gone, and the men who commanded them are either dead, stranded, or staggering through the wreckage of survival. On the sea itself, the survivors are beginning to gather onto destroyers, onto cruisers, onto anything that floats. The night is thick, and the horizon is lit in places by burning fuel. Men cough smoke and cling to railings with blistered hands. Some stare back at their ships as if expecting them to right themselves and resume being invincible. In the darkness, the destroyer that carries Nagumo moves through debris and oil slicks. The air is heavy with the sweet, sick smell of fuel. A sailor vomits quietly over the side, then wipes his mouth and returns to his post without being told. Nagumo stands near the rail, coat collar up, looking toward where Akagi had been. The sky above is dotted with indifferent stars. A junior officer approaches. Hesitant, he wants to say something respectful, something that offers strength. He ends up saying something small and human. "Admiral, we will rebuild." Nagumo does not answer right away. When he finally speaks, his voice is low, and it sounds older than it did that morning. "Rebuild." He repeats the word as if testing its weight. Then he looks toward the darkness where 4 carriers have vanished into fire and sea. "It will take time we do not have." On Yamato, Yamamoto is now faced with the bitterest calculation. Continue the battle. Risk the remainder of the fleet. Seek a night surface engagement. Or withdraw. Save what he can. Accept that the offensive initiative has been crippled. He orders withdrawal. That order, simple and necessary, will later be judged and debated. But in the moment, it is the only move that prevents Midway from becoming an even larger grave. In Tokyo, the admirals begin to shape their words carefully. They speak in terms that can be spoken upward. Setback, unexpected losses. The battle did not proceed as planned. But behind closed doors, when the doors are shut and only uniformed men remain, the language changes. The phrasing becomes raw. We have lost the heart of the fleet. Our offensive power has been shattered. The Americans have taken the initiative, and in those private moments, you can almost hear the unspoken sentence hanging in the smoke. We did not see this coming. Signals become reports. Reports become meetings. Meetings become decisions that will shape the war. In the Naval General Staff Building, the corridors are quieter than usual. Officers still move briskly, still salute, still maintain the clean rituals of discipline. But the atmosphere has changed. It is as if the air itself has absorbed the shock. People speak softer, doors close more firmly. Cigarettes burn down faster. Admiral Osami Nagano sits at a long table with senior officers and planners. Maps are spread out, not just of Midway, but of the entire Pacific. Because Midway has made the whole ocean feel smaller and more dangerous. The talk is not about heroism. It is about capacity. How many pilots remain? How many aircraft? How quickly can we train replacements? How many carriers are left that can operate at the front? Numbers are read aloud. The numbers sound clinical, but they hit like punches. Japan still has ships. Japan still has men. But the concentration of skill and experience that had been packed into 4 carriers is gone, and there is no factory that can quickly manufacture veteran pilots. One officer tries to phrase it in the calm tone of logistics. Our losses in aircrew are severe. Another man, older and more blunt, answers under his breath. Severe is not the word. It is ruin. The room falls silent. Nobody corrects him. In another meeting, the subject is reconnaissance. The pre-battle assumptions. The belief that the American carriers would appear late or in the wrong place. The belief that Midway could be isolated and crushed before the Americans could interfere. A staff officer points to a map and the thin arcs of search patterns that had been flown. He speaks carefully, as if afraid of the truth. Our scouting did not locate the enemy in time. A senior captain responds with bitterness. We did not look far enough. That is the heart of it. The trap depended on knowing where the enemy was. At Midway, Japan did not know, and the Americans did. Behind the formal language, the men begin to circle the question that cannot be avoided. Who made the mistake? In Japanese naval culture, blame is rarely spoken with a single finger pointed openly at first. It moves through implication, through quiet emphasis, through who is praised and who is not, through who is invited into the next meeting and who is left out. And yet, the name Nagumo hangs in the air anyway. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo returns to Japan carrying a defeat that does not fit his reputation. He had led the carrier striking force through Pearl Harbor, through the early victories, through the sense that the Imperial Navy could shape the world. Now he returns without Akagi, without Kaga, without Soryu, without Hiryu, and with the knowledge that thousands of his men lie under the Pacific. He is not greeted as a hero. He is not publicly condemned either. Not immediately. The Navy will not disgrace him in a way that damages the institution. But the conversations behind closed doors sharpen. Some officers say Nagumo hesitated, that he switched armament back and forth, that he failed to launch quickly against the American carriers, that he was too cautious, too bound to procedure. Others defend him, at least partially. They argue that he was trapped by circumstances, that he was forced to respond to Midway's unexpected resistance, that the American torpedo attacks and the need to recover aircraft created a timing window no one could have predicted. The debate is not purely about Nagumo. It is about what kind of Navy Japan will be now that the old certainty is gone. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, though still commander of the combined fleet, feels the pressure too. He had designed the operation. He had insisted on it. He had risked his most precious weapon. Some in Tokyo are careful not to accuse him directly, because his prestige is still immense. But questions are asked with an edge. Was the plan too complex? Was the force too dispersed? Did we underestimate the enemy? Yamamoto hears these questions through channels and through people who speak with too much politeness. He does not explode. He does not argue in public, but in private. His frustration is sharp, because Yamamoto understands something many of the others do not want to admit. The Americans did not win by accident. They read Japanese intentions. They positioned their carriers correctly. They were willing to gamble. They were willing to lose planes in waves if it created a single decisive opening. At Midway, the American Navy acted like a navy that had learned how to fight. And that is the most dangerous kind of enemy. In his quarters, Yamamoto speaks to a close aide, voice low. We have awakened a sleeping strength. It is not a line meant for public consumption. It is a private recognition that the strategic balance has shifted. The enemy is not just present. The enemy is growing. Meanwhile, other Japanese admirals begin the cold arithmetic of what remains. Shokaku and Zuikaku still exist, but they are not in position at Midway, and their air groups are not fully intact. Smaller carriers remain, but they are not equal replacements for the lost giants. New hulls are under construction, but steel and engines cannot replace trained decks crews and veteran strike leaders overnight. In these discussions, the word time appears again and again. Time to build, time to train, time to recover, time that the enemy will not grant. In quiet conversations, some officers admit what would have been unthinkable before June 1942. They speak of defense, of consolidating, of holding a perimeter rather than pushing forward. A younger staff officer objects. We must attack again, otherwise the enemy will regain confidence. A senior admiral answers with tired certainty. The enemy already has confidence now. Outside the meeting rooms, the Navy's information apparatus works to shape what the nation will hear. The Japanese public will not be told the full scale, not immediately. Losses will be minimized. Victories will be emphasized where they can be found. The narrative will be managed. But among the admirals, the reality cannot be hidden, because they must plan the next months and the next battles. And planning now begins with an absence. 4 carriers, 4 air groups, 4 decks that had once launched the Empire's power into the sky. In another office, an officer reads casualty estimates and mutters, almost to himself, "It was too much in one day." A colleague answers, voice flat, "It was the day the tide turned." Even if no one dares to say that sentence loudly, you can feel it in the way their hands move across maps, in the way they pause before speaking, in the way they look at the Pacific like it has become a wider, colder place. And somewhere far from Tokyo, on the dark water, the last embers of Hiryu finally die out, leaving only smoke and empty sea. In the weeks after June 1942, Japanese ships return to bases that feel suddenly smaller. Engines wind down, anchors splash, gangways are lowered. Men step onto solid ground, but they carry the rolling motion of the sea in their bones, and they carry something heavier in their minds. The survivors of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu move through ports like ghosts. Many do not speak much. Some cannot stop speaking, words tumbling out late at night in barracks and sick bays, trying to turn images into sentences that can be endured. A flight deck that turned into a furnace in minutes. A corridor filled with smoke so thick you could not see your own hands. A friend shouting once, then never again. For the high command, those images are distant, reduced into neat lines of text, but the emotional truth still reaches them. Because the loss is not abstract. The loss is operational. It appears on readiness charts, on pilot rosters, on the empty spaces where elite carrier air groups used to be. In Tokyo, the Admirals continue to meet. They adjust plans. They allocate remaining assets. They talk about fortifying island chains, about defending routes, about bringing new pilots through accelerated training. And beneath all of that, there is an unspoken question that lurks in every discussion. What did we tell ourselves that was not true? Some of them had believed the enemy was weak. Some had believed Japanese spirit could overcome any material disadvantage. Some had believed the war could be decided quickly by one brilliant stroke. Midway burns through those beliefs like fire through aviation fuel. In private, in offices with doors shut and only trusted men present, the language becomes blunt. We underestimated the Americans. We overestimated ourselves. We relied too much on surprise. We assumed we would control the pace. These are not public admissions. They are internal wounds being exposed just long enough to disinfect them with reality. Admiral Osami Nagano, who must speak upward to the government and to the emperor, chooses words with care. He speaks of an unfortunate reversal, of lessons learned, of the continued resolve of the Navy. His tone is steady, but the men around him notice that he no longer speaks with the easy certainty of early 1942, because certainty requires momentum, and momentum has been lost. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto remains outwardly composed. He continues to direct operations, to move forces, to plan, to maintain the posture of command. But those close to him can see the weight Midway has placed on his shoulders. He has always understood American industrial capacity. He has always feared a long war. Midway does not create that fear. It confirms it. In quiet moments, he speaks with staff members and trusted officers, and his phrases are stripped down to essentials. We must not waste what remains. We must choose battles carefully. We must avoid another Midway. It is an admiral's way of saying the Empire cannot afford shocks like this again. For Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the battle becomes a shadow that follows him. He does not give dramatic speeches. He does not write a public confession. He returns to duty because the Navy needs experienced commanders, and because in his world, duty does not end when your confidence breaks. But in conversations among officers, his name becomes a symbol. Some speak it with contempt, others with reluctant sympathy, but always with the knowledge that Midway has turned his career into a cautionary tale. If you listen to those conversations, what stands out is not just blame, it is the fear of surprise. How did they appear above us like that? How did they find us? How did we not see them? The American dive bombers dropping out of the sun become more than an attack. They become a nightmare image, proof that an enemy can reach you even when you think you have built a perfect plan. Rear Admiral Taemin Yamaguchi, who chose to remain with Hiryu, becomes another kind of symbol. In the Imperial Navy's culture, his decision is framed as heroic, the ultimate devotion, but even that heroism cannot erase the strategic reality. His death is absorbed into the narrative of sacrifice. Yet sacrifice cannot lift a burned flight deck back out of the sea. In the end, what the Japanese admirals said at Midway and after Midway was shaped by who they were. Nagumo, controlled and procedural, spoke in short orders and grim acknowledgments, his restraint barely holding back shock. Yamamoto, the strategist, spoke in quiet sentences that recognized a shift in the war's structure, not just its emotions. Nagano, the institutional leader, spoke in terms that could be carried upward, language that tried to protect the Navy even as it absorbed a blow. Ugaki and other staff officers spoke in the language of record and analysis, because they understood that if the Navy did not learn, it would die. Yet if you strip away rank and culture and bureaucracy, there is one simple truth that connects all of them, even when they never say it plainly. They expected victory, and instead they received a day of sudden, brutal finality. 4 carriers sunk or destroyed beyond use, a whole offensive arm shattered. A war that had looked like a sweeping conquest transformed into a long struggle where Japan would increasingly be reacting, defending, and bleeding. Midway did not end the war. Not immediately. There were still battles ahead. Still moments of fierce Japanese strength, still daring operations, still terrible losses on both sides. But Midway changed the direction of the tide. On June 4th, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy learned that its greatest weapon could be taken away in hours. And once that lesson is learned, it never truly leaves the mind.